Welcome to this edition of V Radio. If this is your first time tuning into V Radio, you can check out my archives either on my YouTube channel or on Anchor Podcasts. Over the course of the years, I've interviewed senators, congressmen, activists, scientists, documentary filmmakers. I've done some on-site reporting, back in the days of Occupy. Unfortunately, I'm handicapped and can't do that anymore. But I'm trying to bring a spin-free as much as possible, experience as far as trying to analyze what's really going on in the world right now. I am left-leaning, but my show is more about just, trying to be clear as far as to what's actually taking place. If I have an opinion about something, I'll give it, but I generally qualify that, ahead of time. So today my guest is Chris. Chris, how do you want to be referred to while we have this conversation?
People on the street know me as WYSIWYG TV, which is what you see is what you get, but Chris is my name, and I'm happy with anything. Okay.
All right, Chris, it is, WYSIWYG. All right, so I actually was, you were brought to my attention by the Villain Report, who I had on my show recently, and we discussed things that were going on at the WYSPA. My first question that I always give a guest is, what was the precipice moment for you that made you become an activist?
I'll be honest, I don't consider myself an activist, but maybe I am, and I didn't realize it. I had watched the rioting going on all over the country, and I had seen a number of camera people and news crews being assaulted by people in the streets. And I sort of witnessed one of these firsthand and decided that what I was going to do was take a camera out, because that's my background, and go show what was happening in the street for myself and sort of be there to protect these other camera people. And that hasn't happened very often out on the street, but that's what got me out there.
So is this your first time really kind of recording an activist event then?
No, I've been doing this now since August of last year.
Okay.
I had met up with another live streamer and offered to show her around LA while she was here, and spent some time driving her around and holding the camera for her a little bit, and just getting a sense of what it was like to be out in protests and covering them, and decided that when she left, I wanted to sort of carry on this camera spot in LA, because there weren't that many people that were doing it at the time.
Right. Well, no, that makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad that you did. There was some pretty disturbing footage of what went on there on the 3rd, and unfortunately when I had Villain on, that was an area that he didn't have quite as much firsthand knowledge about, because he didn't get there until later. But that puts you, basically in a position to be able to help me with something that I've been having problems with. Now, I know what I perceive to be what happened, but it's one of the things that's frustrating about trying to figure out what's going on at these things, and that's why I gave the example to Villain Report, that like Daniel Ellsberg used to work at the Pentagon, and he was the guy who released the Pentagon Papers, and what made him decide to go investigate what was going on in Vietnam himself was that what he was seeing in the paperwork didn't, add up. And, that's kind of what I feel is going on with these situations, is that there's a spin from both sides, who have their own agendas essentially, and then the police obviously also kind of have their own agenda about how they want events to be portrayed and to be understood. So, we, the citizens, most people who are kind of, I would say, on a team, which is a nice way of saying cult, I guess, when it comes to the left and the right. We have, most people are just kind of expected to just jump on whatever side of it they think is their side politically. And that's just never been how I've operated. But my guess was essentially, is from what I saw, there's just plenty of footage out there of Antifa attacking the protesters at the WYSPA on the 3rd, and that these protesters, they didn't look like hardlined MAGA-wearing, in fact, some of them just looked like moms, or I remember there was
correct, yeah.
like a Hispanic couple, and that was actually the most quintessential perfect clip I saw, was this Hispanic couple walking along peacefully with their signs and then getting confronted by Antifa, and then assaulted, not quite as brutally as they assaulted some of the other people, because I guess, they just kind of turned and left immediately. But the point is that any question in my mind, at least in that instant, was over as far as to who was the aggressor. And I think one of the things that I've encountered in my experience in talking to these people is that they are of the view that them initiating violence is self-defense. It's part of the Antifa philosophy that if you're engaging in offensive action against somebody who is perceived to be a fascist, then you're just trying to prevent fascism from rising. So therefore you have a carte blanche, free ticket to just attack anybody you want, but it's still an act of self-defense. Now, and
they've made that clear.
Right. They make it clear, but it's usually I would say only within their own circles to some degree, but I talk to people all the time who still don't know that, and if you try to tell them that Antifa attacks people without provocation, if you're on Facebook, they'll click the laugh react or, whatever, that's just the most preposterous thing that they've ever heard, and I got into an exchange with somebody like that. I don't know how much of my channel you've listened to, but, she just was like, well, this video isn't conclusive and that video is not conclusive and this isn't evidence. And, at first I was like, okay, so this person is either a person in Antifa who's trying to twist the narrative, or it's just somebody who's so brainwashed to believe that, Antifa, never does anything. But then again, she was also somebody who is part of the delusion of trying to pretend they don't exist, which for those of us who've been in the left activism for longer, I just kind of laugh about that, because at Occupy, everybody knew who they were. That's, they didn't make any bones about it, and they weren't trying to pretend they weren't there. The reason it was a problem is that Occupy had a nonviolence strategy. That was our big deal. And Antifa would just follow us around and break stuff, and then we would have to deal with the media's misperception of us. So anyway, I guess let's just take it from the top. Why don't you go ahead and explain what made you come to the decision to go on July 3rd, and then what you experienced when you got there?
I feel like I need to step back just a little bit, just so that...
Go ahead.
To give you a little bit of my background, I've been covering just events in LA. So whether that's on the right or the left, I've been to a lot of Trump rallies. I've tried to cover protests and different events on the left. It's much harder on the left because I'm clearly not welcome even at press conferences that they're holding for the press. I've been run out because they see me, they don't want me there. And even the Trump rallies, I've had people come up to me and ask me who I am and question why I'm there and what side I'm on. So it's not something new to me that I would have this issue. But I had been following Antifa for a while, and through their social media channels, I had seen prior to the 3rd when Cubana Angel posted up and her video went viral about what had taken place at the spa that day. I saw right away this protest at the WYSIWYG where I would say what I'll call the protesters, mostly from the right, were going out to protest the WYSIWYG over. And when that flyer came out and circulated through social media, I then saw the left, the counter protesters, talking about going out and stopping this protest from going on. So I knew the week before that it was going to get ugly from the rhetoric that was coming from the counter protesters about stopping people and claiming trans rights and whatnot. So I knew before I went out there on the 3rd that it was going to be a heated debate, and also knowing that they tend to show up earlier in order to claim the space as their own and keep people from coming in. We had seen it happen during a White Lives Matter rally that they turned out to be a honeypot in Huntington Beach. They were down there even earlier than I was, and I sort of expected people to show up early. So I knew that showing up early in the morning on July 3rd, even at 9 o'clock, I was already late, which is exactly what happened. Because as I drove around trying to figure out where I was going to park, I could see already at 9 o'clock in the morning that there were groups of Antifa members walking around, and they were scouting. They were scouting for who knows what. They were out in pairs walking several block radius of the WE Spa. And then as I drove by WE Spa, you could see that there was already at 9 a.m. at least 50 people that were standing out in front of the spa, all dressed in some knot and block. But it was apparent at 9 that it was going to be trouble.
So, okay, so basically what you're getting at is just that you cover all kinds of stuff in LA, not just like, activism stuff as we've kind of, gone over now. But, So you arrived there then, and you said people were there pretty early then.
Yes, because originally the protest against the WE Spa was set for 11 o'clock. And one of the counter-protest posters that went out said 10 o'clock. And then as the week went and got closer to the 3rd, I saw it change to 9 a.m. So that's just traditionally been something that they've done tactically to counter these protests just so that they don't see.
Right, so that they can get there and kind of ahead of time have a plan about what they're going to do. Now, so was I correct, I guess, then, in my assessment that the protesters that showed up for the WE Spa were not like your typical hardline, protesters? Like that's what it looked like to me. They all just seemed normal people, like normal people.
Right. I believe the protesters that showed up or were planning on showing up at 11, they would be the group that came closer to 11 o'clock and marched down Wilshire Boulevard towards WE Spa around 11 o'clock. What the people who had showed up earlier, in fact, from that video that you sent me, the one young man, Jairo, who claimed to be the organizer of the WE Spa protest, he showed up before I got there. So he was there sometime around 9 o'clock in the morning. And you see how he was met with the protesters, the counter-protesters. They took his signs. He reacted with pepper spray, and then they beat him up. A group of them, went after him. And then somewhere in there, I showed up, and I think that's where you see the young man with the white all over his face, who came up to me saying that he had been pepper sprayed. He and I have a little bit of history together. And when he said that to me that morning, I thought he was talking about January 6th in LA being sprayed. I didn't realize he was talking about that morning. I didn't even pick up on the fact that he had this stuff on his face, because I knew that he's one of the people that usually tries to make me leave. He's part of that group of people that, I would call their enforcers. And so I knew when he came up to me that I was sort of in a bit of trouble, and I was someplace that they didn't want me. And I gave them that space, and I went across the street. So then after, in that time frame, you see the woman in the pink. She had shown up apparently to protest. So I think that people that showed up prior to 11, I don't know if they were necessarily with the group that was going out to protest. Clearly Jairo was, and he got there really early by himself. Probably a bad idea why he got out there so early. Who knows? And then you had what I would call the preacher group that showed up. The preacher in the white T-shirt. There was one in a black T-shirt, one in a blue T-shirt. They showed up apparently after, because there was a man in a black shirt that had something slung over his body that after I had moved across the street from We Spa, they were drawn to him and were pushing him out. That's as I walked across the street to show what was going on as they were attacking him.
Now, was he one of the ones who was with the preacher guy? Like, was he one of the ones who was with the preacher guy with the hat, or?
It turns out he apparently was, based on some of the other video I've seen. He's within that group, but I hadn't seen the other preachers yet. In fact, I never saw the preachers that day because when I was attacked and pepper sprayed, I ended up going back to my vehicle to get myself cleaned up and get the pepper spray off me before I returned. And apparently in that time frame, that's when this group of preachers showed up.
Okay.
Because I got back out on the street when the group of protesters that was supposed to show up at 11 was marching towards the We Spa from what would be MacArthur Park, which is west of We Spa.
Okay.
So
I guess
walked towards We Spa.
So the ongoing theme, though, is, I mean, I did actually want to ask about those preachers because, if there was a group out there that I'd be concerned about how they might behave, might have, not to say that they would have been violent, but just as in, I don't know, because there's that, I didn't know if they were like Westboro Baptist Church style fanatics or, what their story was. So, I mean, how are they conducting themselves? I mean, do you think they were spewing hatred or?
Well, from all the video I've seen so far, I haven't heard any true hatred. They have their beliefs from what I've seen on the video. They didn't even have time to do that because in the one video that you see as they're walking what would be eastbound towards We Spa, they're coming up and you see this group of Black Bloc heading towards them to cut them off. And they sort of move towards the middle of the street to go around the Black Bloc, and they just get stopped in their tracks. So that from the video appears to be their first run-in with the group that was there.
Okay.
And it's
so
not
yeah, I guess with
Antifa
Antifa having already established more or less the perimeter, I guess, they were able to catch these people as they filtered in, in smaller groups and then just drive them off. That's kind of the feeling. That's one of the reasons I said it didn't really feel like these people were necessarily experienced. I kind of got the impression that a lot of them probably had never even protested anything before.
Well, I think this preacher group had, because I actually spoke to what I believe is the leader of the group and tell me that they regrouped and moved. That's how they got to the east side of We Spa, where in that video you see the clump of them with their signs. There's it turns out she's a nun in the yellow shirt.
Oh,
wow. And then you've got the preacher in the blue, and then the larger gentleman in the black shirt. There was also a woman that was with them. And as a group, I guess, from what I've been told, they had regrouped and were headed back out to protest. And I've also been told they're sort of professional First Amendment, what I would call First Amendment auditors. They're out challenging, and per the man that I spoke to, he claims that when they lose their First Amendment rights, they file lawsuits against people because of that. They are out there to make sure that they can have their voice, whatever that may be, and they challenge that frequently, apparently. So.
The Westboro Baptist Church has a reputation.
There was kind of two groups. Yeah.
Westboro Baptist Church has a reputation that apparently several members of their family are lawyers, so they're prepared in the event that somebody does anything to them. And I'm not saying
I don't know the name
from.
of this group.
Right.
But they certainly didn't sound as what I've heard of the Westboro group. They didn't sound that way at all. I never heard anything come out of their mouths that,
Did you, was there anything on their signs that would indicate to you that they were transphobic, or?
Again,
or was
I've
it
watched
just
the same video you have.
Oh, okay.
I've paused and looked to see what the signs say.
Right.
Obviously, from a religious standpoint, they don't agree with that. But, I also know the people who were going out to protest against the WYSIWYG. I had looked at all of their social media, and I saw quite clearly what their argument was, which didn't appear to be transphobic, but
right.
they're concerned. You guys talked about it yesterday or whatever it was.
Sure.
About what the issue was of being in the women's room and having this happen and what the expectation was, and that's what I had heard everybody talking about. And then I could tell that it was getting to the point where it was starting to sound like it was going to be a violent day, because the counter protesters were clearly making it about something that it wasn't.
Well, right, and that's, as I've been trying to investigate this situation, like there was also another video that got circulated where a woman, I want to say she had like Hispanic skin tone, but she's concealing her face in all of her videos for good reason, but she gives that account of going to the WYSIWYG like back in January, and that her and her daughter were there and they were nude, and then this this trio of people come in and they, it's not evidence, but they sound like, the description she gives sounds like what members of Antifa look like when you see their mugshots, like the typical tattoos, colored hair. And that's not evidence, but at the same time, the way they were behaving sounded completely reasonable to me. And what I kind of got out of it was like, it sounds to me like three members of Antifa thought it would be cute to go to this spa, push this issue specifically so that they would have a reason to do something. And then because that incident didn't lead to any protests, I guess they figured they didn't have a reason to do it. But, other than that, there's that Precious Child person, and I've interacted with them on their YouTube comments and a bit on their Twitter. Right. But at the end of the day, none of them, like the ones who try to answer the question of whether or not it's okay, like give some pretty cockamamie, ridiculous, like answers that don't make any sense. Precious Child literally just said, pay me and I'll answer you. Otherwise, you're irrelevant to me. Like I'm supposed to pay Precious Child to answer the question of should a pre-op trans woman be allowed to expose their penis to other women, and children without the consent of the parties involved. That's the simple question, and the answers I always get are, either like the weirdness that you've seen already in some of my videos, like the lady who says that, if I as a trans person have a right to feel safe, and if I have to go, or rather if I was a trans person, although she said she identified as trans, separate issue, and if I deserve to go where I feel safe, and if I feel safe in a women's space, then that's where I have to go, and the irony of the fact that that statement directly says, I need to feel safe. If you don't feel safe because I'm in this space, well, that's on you. Like, there's no way to make that work. It doesn't, and it's contradictory to other elements of the woke movement because, where are the feminists in this situation? Which is why there's a divide in the feminist groups right now because, there are feminists who are anti-trans and then there are feminists who are pro-trans. And but that's where I say it's like, it's one thing to have an ideology, that maybe is a little controversial, but it should at least be internally consistent. It should at least make some sort of rational sense, especially if you feel so strongly about it, then you're going to go out in the street and beat people up over it. That's
so Precious. Precious had put out a post on Instagram that claimed that she was alleged to be the one that was in the spa that day. And she used the word alleged, but when you read the post, and I called several people and said, hey, look at that post again and tell me how you're interpreting the post. They all said the same thing. She is admitting to being the person in the spa that Cabana Angel is talking about. And I said, well, that's not what's being told to me. And I reached out directly to Precious because her and I have a working relationship as live streamers. We can say hello to each other. And we do it sort of under, very quietly. Because I know how much trouble she can get in for associating with me. And so when I reached out to Precious and I said, look, I have to know the answer to this question. Were you or were you not the person that was in the spa? She says no. And in fact, she said, thank you for asking that question because nobody else is doing that. And I said, well, that's a problem because I see the hate that you're getting about this. I know you, or I sort of have had these conversations with Precious. And I said, why don't you just help stop this by making everyone clearly aware that it was not you? And even after I put out social media posts saying I have confirmed with Precious it was not her in the spa, people still didn't believe me because of Precious's post. And
go ahead.
Yeah, and that disturbed me that Precious was unwilling to clarify to people. And going into the third, it set up even more so this argument between the pro-trans and what they're calling anti-trans, even LAPD is saying anti-trans, which it's never been for the people that I've talked to, seeing male genitalia in a women's space. And they've said that and tried to make that clear over and over again. So I'm like, okay, I know you're making that clear, but I can tell you that that's not what you're going into come Saturday the 3rd. And I was right.
And that's kind of how they...
Right, but...
Yeah, right. Well, that's how they try to frame it all the time. And, like, the funny thing about this is that the best person in my wedding is a trans person. I've left my children in the care of trans friends of mine who babysat them when they were younger. It's like, I don't, for example, believe that trans people are more likely to be pedophiles. I think a pedophile might try to abuse the concept of trans to get access to children, but I don't think trans people are more likely to be pedophiles. I don't hate them. I don't, but it's like I actually got doxxed and death threats for making 2 videos analyzing the true science about the issue of transgender people in sports.
Right.
They get really upset and they say, you're denying my right to exist. That's their favorite thing. And Precious themselves on their Twitter was like, made a statement. I took a video of it, was like, I'm generally depressed about today. People are denying our right to exist and all of that. And I'm like, nobody protested about your right to exist. That, I mean, there may have been people who did. That's why I was asking about the Christian group.
I didn't see a single sign that said anything about anybody trans negatively in any way.
Right. And I do remember people being accosted and the people trying to explain to them, to Antifa, that they, that's not, they didn't hate trans people. This was about the children,
right.
And
right.
And I just, the thing is that here's the point that I made I'm sorry, now I'm having a terrible moment trying to remember his name because it's like essentially the same name. No, not Precious, actually, the fellow I just talked to last night.
Bill.
Say that again?
Villain?
Yeah, Villain. There we go. I was going to say Vigilante. I was like, I know it's not Vigilante. Anyway, it was Villain. I was talking to Villain. I was like, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it was a hoax or not because that's their new thing, is just to try to say that it didn't happen. Okay.
I can prove that it did happen based on what was in that video.
Right. Well, no, and that's what I'm getting at, though, is that even if it didn't, they're still defending that should be possible. Like, everybody in the situation is still saying, well, if a trans person wants to do this, then they just should be allowed to do this.
Right.
So that's what I was getting at.
The people that I've spoken to on the left that all disagree, I don't want to name names, but say, no, my kids, I don't want them in that space. These are two prominent figures that I've been dealing with lately, in private conversations, say, no, I'm not okay with that either. They would be on the same side as the protesters going up to WYSIWYG, and even Precious herself said, no, I don't think it's been marked as a co-ed space. Then yes, it would be a totally different argument. But even Precious herself did not agree with male genitalia being in a women's space under those circumstances.
Well, that's good to hear, and I'm willing to believe that for sure. You know, I guess it wasn't.
I could give you the text messages that show that. I just haven't.
No, I believe it.
I like Precious. I like Precious a lot, and I'll be honest, I've never talked to Precious and stood there and thought, oh, pedophile. It's not something, I don't equate that. And I like Precious
I didn't get that vibe from them either.
No.
Oh, I did get the vibe,
I get pedophile vibes from people who are creepy that do, look at children strange. That's where I go. But yeah, when I started seeing it, I was like, please don't do this, because I knew it was an incendiary moment put out, and there was no stopping it.
Well, and that's the thing that bothers me, even from the activist perspective. And that's one of the things I said in one of my videos, is like, if you're a member of Antifa listening to this, what you just did is going to cause real transphobia. Like, as in, full on, we hate you. Now we don't think you have a right to exist. Why? Because you get gangs of people to beat up innocent people, who are protesting.
Right.
It was like, you basically, like, when they involved Antifa in the situation, and Antifa just used it as an opportunity to beat people up, and in ways that were vicious, and in ways that were indiscriminate, attacking innocent people, I was like, do you think any of this helped the trans community? But it all comes back to one of the things I remember. There was a Black Lives Matter chapter that started to form in the small town next to my small town. And because I'm an activist, people added me to this Facebook group, and I just kind of was initially kind of quietly reading as I watched this thing develop. And, initially it was meant to just be kind of a peaceful, we're going to go out and we're going to march and stuff like that. And then, some people of color came in and said, well, you guys are white. You can't run this. We're going to run this, and we're going to make it much more militant. Essentially they just kind of started to try to turn it into something very negative very quickly. But the point is that at one point during my conversations with them, I exposed them to the work of Daryl Davis, who is actually going to be on my show later this week. And Daryl Davis is a black man who goes to Ku Klux Klan rallies. And what he does is he humanizes black people to these racists to the point that they just lose interest in racism because he befriends them. And he actually ends racism with these people, real racists, not people that are being called racist because they didn't like the Star Wars films, or the new ones meaning, or didn't like Black Panther or something, real racists, but what they said was, I said, well, they're like, well, I don't like his strategy. You don't need to do that with these people, blah, blah, blah. I was like, well, how do you think you're ever going to convince anybody? And they said, well, I don't want to convince anybody. I want to make them afraid, and I was like, oh boy. I'm like, if you understand
only
anything
creates more hate.
Right, exactly. If you know anything about the psychology of hatred, you understand that it's almost all based in fear. I was watching a documentary about the KKK recently, what's left of them, because it's really kind of a pathetic organization. It's so much smaller than it used to be. But what the documentarian, who was actually a European, said as he was kind of closing it up with like his final thoughts, was that this is clearly a group of people who are afraid. And I'm like, oh, well, there we go. Yep. So it's like, if you want people to accept you, like if I was the one trying to handle that situation and I was a trans activist, I'd be having a peaceful moment where we sat and talked to those people, where we spoke out about how, no, we don't want to hurt your children. That they didn't do any of that. Instead, they gave them every reason to hate them. And then they also, because of the way they treated you and everybody there, that incites the real people who are going to want to engage in violence against trans people to show up. So I guess, like, go ahead and give your specific story about how you went in there. I've seen it on video in pieces, but, you just kind of showed up, and then what, did they just start attacking you immediately, or was there a progression?
No, there's progression, and I made a couple. I made a few mistakes. I that were there covering the event, knowing that it was going on, and I know typically that I cannot be out and about within the Antifa group without police around, because in the past they've shown that the minute there's no police around, I'm getting attacked. And I felt really comfortable that day because I knew that there was people around that I knew, and it was daytime, and I gave these people way too much credit, thinking that they would not attack me the way they did. And immediately I got my camera going. I had a couple little technical things, but just because I was so focused on who I was seeing and knowing these usual faces around and the press that was out there already at that moment, I made the decision to try to cross the street, and I saw local news media was out, which is typical. Local news media usually shows up at the beginning or at the end of an event. They don't document the entire thing usually. They get in there, they get their B-roll, and then they go off and they do their story about whatever they think happened. And I sort of made my way up what is Rampart Street towards the back entrance of WYSIWYG when this young man came up to me and said, "You're not welcome here." You know, they wanted to push me out. I had actually walked up all the way to the entrance of the spa where some of the news trucks were, and I walked around showing what was going on, and a number of the other protesters, we'll keep it at the counter protesters, were saying things to me, and they're calling me out by name. They know who I am. It's clear they don't like me. I give them a hello and a wink and say hi and try to be pleasant and kind of let the hate bounce off of me. And I walked around, and I don't think my stream was going out very well for whatever reason. So it wasn't necessarily all captured on camera, but I have it recorded because of the way I've been working. Anyway, then I got pushed over across the street. They asked me to go across the street. I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to go across the street because I knew that the potential for that danger was there, and I'm going to appease them and just go cover it from a distance. Because in the few months that I've been doing this, I've learned that if I try to give them that and I stay back and, not show their faces, but just show a wide shot of what's going on, I can sometimes get away with it. And I also knew that there was no police around. So if they did decide to come after me, I was in trouble. And that's what ended up happening when they attacked this guy in the black T-shirt, and I moved across the street. It looked like, because of my lens setting, because I was so far across the street that I was on my telephoto lens, that as I walked up, it appeared that I was really close. But from some of that video that you can see that you sent me, you could see that I wasn't that close. It was the girl with the Antifa flag that I first realized this is going to be bad, because instead of doing what she'd normally do is just put her flag up or put an umbrella up in front of me and not touch me with it, she was all over my camera with it. And then, one of them came around and slapped my monopod. And I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to get out of here? This is a lot of people, and they don't care about this preacher anymore, this other guy. They now care about me. And what is my egress going to be? Because I knew I was in trouble right away, and I had made a really bad miscalculation on the day. And that's when, again, the girl with the flag and their tactics, it all happened so fast, and I'm thinking about what I'm going to do, how I'm going to get out of there. I've already gotten caught where I'm behind, and that's when I get a sucker punch from behind the flag, and it just, it got ugly really, really fast. They pepper sprayed me 3 times, and some of that video that was in there I hadn't seen before, and it's really amazing how, I want to say savage. I got to give them credit for being so well organized in how they did it. There's a moment where I get knocked down by the guy with the skateboard, And my first thought was, if I don't get up fast, I'm in trouble because
they were just kicking people while they were down. Like, they were brutally.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, that's when it steps into felonious assault. If I remember it, that's when you're like, you can't just do that. And the cops just, they didn't do anything about it on the 3rd at all.
Right. Yeah. I did not want to lose I have 2 iPhones basically on my rig, and sadly, that was sort of my biggest concern, was that's what I didn't want to lose. But it was, my instinct was to go across that hedge and create some space. And then I got pushed as I was going over the hedge. But it was funny to see in that video how, like, they wouldn't cross that hedge. Like, that was like kryptonite for them. I was like, that is so weird to see that. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess that instinct was good. But obviously they chased me all the way to Coronado, which was that next street where, fortunately, there was a police car that was coming out.
Right.
And that's when they all backed off. So I feel like I got lucky that police car was there, but, that's where that moment ended for me, which gave me the ability to sort of regroup and get cleaned off. The ambulance showed up because, I had so much pepper spray on me, but the ambulance was like, yeah, there's nothing we can really do for you. You need to go home and shower. I'm like, okay, well then forget it, because I didn't want them to have the moment of seeing me getting treated for what was going on. And I'm like, you know what? That's okay, guys. I'm gonna get out of this thing, and I'm gonna go and I'll take care of myself. And that's what I did. I went to my truck, and I had a bunch of bottles of water. I basically just hosed myself down, got the burning to stop, and I was like, okay, what gear am I going to lose? Where am I going to go? And I went back out with just my camera handheld to document the rest of it, with the hopes of basically doing exactly what they hate, which is getting their faces, and they just stand out there and show me who they are and taunt me after this attack, which I find really stupid, that they would basically admit to doing this and be on camera. It's daytime, and I was just mad, but I was not going to let them know that they got the best of me. And I just went out there and kept recording. And that's when I first got out there, I heard the group of, original protesters coming down the street, what the left would call the Proud Boys and the Patriots and whatnot. They're coming down the street towards the WE Spa, and that's when there's another big clash that happens. Apparently, there's some knives that get pulled.
So this is on the 3rd still, right?
This is all still just the 3rd.
Okay.
And at this point, the I think you see in that video that you sent, which is the preacher with the blue has been attacked and hit over the head, and apparently that's when an officer on scene. There was, from what I understand, there was 2 units that were detailed to WE Spa that day that were out there, two squad cars that were out there to monitor the situation. Well, apparently some point after I had contact with LAPD, that LAPD officers put out a help call, and that's what brought in the cavalry, even though it took apparently over an hour before they had enough resources to do anything. So what I understand is that the officers that showed up, that were there when the man in the blue had gotten hit over the head, and they walked towards the officers, which is eastbound Wilshire from WE Spa. Those officers were coming from an outside division from Rampart. They're just showing up, and they're trying to determine what's going on. They're trying to coordinate to put together a line and basically bring this all to an end.
Now, just to take a quick moment for clarification, because there's not really a lot of footage on the 3rd of any people that I would have associated as Proud Boys, at least not that I've seen. But now that it's gone later, it's kind of hard to differentiate what date you're dealing with when you're looking at the video clips. But you're saying that there was kind of an organized right element that showed up eventually?
Yeah. What is the group of people that I believe were coming out to protest at 11 a.m.
Okay.
It looks as though, from what I understand, they ended up meeting in the park as a meeting point to go protest, knowing that by this point, these people had been there. Some of them have said that they had seen my live stream. They were getting video from other sources, so they knew what was going on down there. They knew that people were being attacked, and apparently that brought some people in because they were seeing, what was happening, and they're like, we're going down there. And so that's that group that came eastbound on Wilshire.
Okay.
That met up with Antifa, basically.
Okay, well, I'm glad I got that information, because up until now, I didn't know that there was any kind of right element. I thought it was pretty much just those people you see getting the crap beat out of them by 30 plus or whatever Antifa kids, who are just singling them out one at a time, But I guess, but anyway, go ahead and continue with what you were saying about the police. Yeah. Or unless you had something else, go ahead.
No, just because of what you were saying about the group. I don't think there was that many people that were going out to protest the WYSIWYG. I bet you, there might have been 20, maybe 30 people that would have protested in front of WYSIWYG and stood there with some signs had Antifa not been there. Saw us show up that day. Like, it wouldn't have been a big deal. It wouldn't have been enough to, cause that sort of violence towards anybody that would have made it worthwhile in the bad light of what Antifa did that day to just ignore it. That's my gut based on the numbers that I saw show up.
That makes sense.
What would be the right or the protest group. So literally what ended up happening is you've got police organizing to the east of WYSIWYG, and you've got the group from the right marching eastbound from MacArthur Park up Wilshire, and you've got the group from the WYSIWYG that is marching towards them westbound on Wilshire, and they basically collide at Coronado, where you get some fights that start, there's some assaults that occur, there's a pepper spraying that happens, there's sort of this melee that occurs. And while that's happening, all of a sudden, behind most of the people that you see video from, which would be those on the right, there's a group of officers which have now started to form a line, which then ends up separating the two groups of people that were fighting in the street. And then after that, they sort of block people off, but then as the protester group heads back towards the park, there's another sort of fight that occurs with some press people and some of the Patriot protesters before everybody breaks up and heads back. And now at this point in the day, it's after 11 o'clock. The two groups have been separated. Now Antifa turns their protest instead of towards anybody coming to the WYSIWYG. They now are going after the cops, and the cops have formed their line. They've shut down Wilshire Boulevard, and they're pushing the protesters back towards WYSIWYG. And that's when we see the dumpster get pushed out and set on fire. And now they're, throwing objects at the police, and the police basically respond by just calling a dispersal, and people sort of de-block and leave from there. And that ended the day on the 3rd.
So yeah, that's like a lot of the video that I had seen from the earlier portions of the day. Like, people were making it to the cops, and the cops are like, "We can't help you. Like, if you don't like what's going on, you should just leave." I was kind of frustrated with that, and that's the kind of stuff that drives Villain crazy. Especially because they're witnessing it. And then go ahead with what you were going to say.
Well, in regards to that, like the group the preacher group, they're clearly assaulted. He's bleeding. Oh, and then there's this other guy that ended up having some rosaries that he hit one of the Antifa people with, sort of in front of the police. Right, that all happened right there on that corner east of WYSIWYG. But right then and there, the preachers want to file a police report, and the cops are like, "No, now is not the time. We have to get control of the crowd." And the preachers were upset, apparently, from what they told me, that the police didn't want to take their report. And then I've heard at the same time that it wasn't the time to do that, and the officers had said, "Look, stand back here. We'll come back and we'll take care of the report as soon as we get the crowd under control." So
unfortunately, that pretty much ensures that nobody's going to get arrested at that point. That's
right. The police
one of the things.
There's
right. Well, yeah, and I can't.
They know about the assaults. Right.
Right. That's kind of what I mean. I was Villain is pretty jaded about this particular issue, and I get it. It's just that I've actually watched a video, and it occurs to me I forgot to share it with him, but there's a video that discusses what police tactics are when dealing with riots, and one part of it is that they acknowledge out of the gate that they very likely do not have a sufficient number of police officers to ever actually stop a riot, unless that they've, unless
and
they've
they
gotten
didn't that day.
Right, and unless they have
didn't have the
reinforcements
numbers to initiate arrests.
Right, and I've heard 4-1, I've heard 10-1, and I get why they would need that many because they get de-arrested, and if it's a really hostile crowd, like those crazy, I don't even remember seeing that crazy video in New York where a guy walked up with a brick and just smashed it over the back of a cop's head. So imagine you're trying to arrest somebody and you're kneeling down to put the cuffs on them, and some guy comes up and hits you, so that only makes it even more complicated. And then on top of all that, if you're in Portland or one of these places where the DA is like asleep or something, then they're not going to prosecute him anyway. That's really the most maddening part about all of this is that there's dozens of felonies going on, and misdemeanors going on right there, and because they're creating a situation where essentially the police are sending the message that we are not really equipped to handle this, so you're kind of on your own. It turns the circumstance of the protest itself into like a brief Wild West scenario, and the fact that more people haven't been shot is honestly kind of surprising to me, because that's the kind of thought that goes through your head when you're looking at this kind of stuff going on. It's like, well, Jesus, if I ever went to one of those, I'd want to be armed, and that's the funny thing that, because I did a lot of work on the Kyle Rittenhouse incident, all these people from the left on the left side of it say like, well, he shouldn't even have had a gun. And I'm like, well, despite the fact that there were several people on camera from the Black Lives Matter group with guns in their hands, one of which was the first shooter, Joshua Zeminski, who actually got arrested as a result of my video, that are all felons. Like, they're not supposed to have them either, and it comes down to this. Like, if that armed group that was in Kenosha wasn't armed, that group would have just walked over there and stomped on them. They were really militantly angry that somebody put out their dumpster fire, But as far as to what's like relevant to WYSIWYG, it's like they're just kind of running roughshod over everybody. They're all using weapons of some kind, and the real reason that they want to demonize the idea of firearms at these protests is because they know that's going to put, a damper on their monopoly of force of the situation, and it puts them in a situation where they're not necessarily going to be as in control of the violence as they would like to be, and that's unfortunate. But the funny thing is that these people are very anti-gun, and I'm a rare leftist who's pro-gun, but I'm like, you guys are giving people reasons to want to own guns, honestly, I was like, I cannot imagine being unarmed and living, say, near Minneapolis or living near where any of these things are going on. Because, and I've even contacted friends of mine that I know live in those areas. I'm like, you guys are armed, right? Like, you can protect yourself, because you're not going to get a response from the police, at least not within time of actually being able to help you.
Right.
So they're forcing a situation that puts us in a circumstance where people either get to choose to defend themselves or just let these mobs do whatever they want. And what do they want to do? Well, they either want to assault people or they want to destroy their property, or they, and if you don't like that they're destroying your property, then you get told, well, you think that property is more important than people, as if, especially when it's somebody's business, as if that has no implications on their life, So, with all of these things, that happen on July 3rd, did you end up going back on any of the other days, or did you kind of get your fill of it on that day?
Oh, no. Just to take a little bit of a step back,
Go ahead.
because you brought up something that I had forgot, which was when they first separated the two crowds, and LAPD formed a line, they did shoot off some shotgun rounds, the beanbag shotgun rounds. One of them was because this one fella tried to throw a water bottle at me. When he threw a water bottle at me, the officer instantly shot towards one of them in the leg with the beanbag. And then after that happened, the Antifa counter protest side was getting really sort of violent towards the officers. And there's one young man who apparently, he's wearing a blue jacket, got really ballsy and struck an officer with a shotgun in the face. And I had heard about this because he was wanted by LAPD for an assault on an officer. And when I went back and watched my footage, I caught that incident on camera, not realizing it. And, it's sort of the typical tactic that somebody comes from the back, they hit the officer, and then they dive behind the group, and the group creates a wall hiding that person. And he managed to get away from the officers that day. So technically they probably would have wanted to have made an arrest, but because of their numbers, weren't able to initiate that. Also, too, is during the day of the 3rd, there were 2 journalists that were attacked by apparently the same person, one of which was a conservative journalist, and then the other one was a leftist journalist, part of their authorized media. And that person ended up reaching out to me a few days later. And I'm not going to get into the whole story, but basically what I was told by this person is he feared that things were getting really bad and the attacks on the media, especially me, were going to increase because the left was mad because their journalist had been attacked by somebody from the right. And he reached out to me because he didn't want to see this continue and was trying to put a stop to it. And so at this point, I'm like, okay, I know that they're going to go back out again on the 17th. And I know that I've sort of got a bigger target on my back, bigger than normal. And I made the decision that I wasn't sure if I was going to go back out because I knew that it would be very difficult for me to be out there. But I said, you know what, I'm going to go back out there because I'm not going to let them scare me. I was going to go out and cover and do what I was going to do. So that's what I did. And I played it very careful. And in fact, Dylan had reached out to me the day before, said, hey, I'm coming into town. Would you be willing to sort of host me? And I'm like, absolutely. I didn't know Dylan. I didn't know anything about him. I hadn't really seen his stream, and we had a nice conversation. And I picked him up and drove him around that day. And I like the friendship Dylan and I have now. And it's really interesting because it's we come from 2 different worlds and we're able to get along and have these conversations. And So we showed up on the morning of the 3rd. He went off and he did his thing. He went right into Antifa, and I was like, God, this guy, he's gutsy. I sort of monitored what was going on. I had seen that what LAPD had decided to do was basically put themselves in front of WYSIWYG, which for me was tough because what they did was they allowed Antifa to then be outside of that circle where anybody who approached now had no support. And we showed up at 8 o'clock in the morning at WYSIWYG. And I was actually able to walk all the way down to WYSIWYG at 8. I had seen a group of officers stand on the corner where I had parked a couple blocks away and walked down and talked to them, where I saw the left had put up some they had put up some giant stickers on the front of the marquee of the theater that's there. And also, too, is Antifa had gone through the night before and spray painted all the buildings up and down Wilshire Boulevard, sort of in a 2-block range of the WYSIWYG. Nazis go home, all the typical Antifa stuff. And so I stood there and talked to the officers about that. And then I walked myself down to WYSIWYG, where there was a group of officers down in the front. And one of the officers threw out to me because he saw my press pass. He goes, this is going to be the press area, this corner over here. I was like, okay, cool. Thank you very much. And at that point, I sort of had contact with a young man who's part of Antifa and had some words with him. And I could tell already that it was going to be a tough day. And I was going to be having a hard time covering anything that was going on. And so as the crowd built and the police put themselves on that corner in front of the spa, the press lost that corner. And Antifa ended up taking the 3 corners opposite of WYSIWYG, where they were protesting. So I sort of worked my way around the backside in my vehicle, watching what was going on, sort of monitoring where everybody was at, and ended up coming up on the backside of WYSIWYG. Because that's the way the police had set up, and that was the only way I could sort of safely be out of my vehicle and seeing what was going on. And of course, right away they noticed me, and they saw that I was back there and sort of yelling at me. But it was, I don't know, the second or third time that morning that a group had sort of started coming towards me as they saw that I was out and about.
Right.
So, yeah, I was a little nervous, especially being out there by myself. And at this point, Villain, he's in and around WYSIWYG doing his thing. And
well, I think when they encounter him, they initially can't tell if he's not one of them. Like his dress and his demeanor, might make you think he's Antifa if you look at him initially.
Right. Oh,
like,
yeah, he totally looked like Antifa the way he was out there.
Right, and that throws them off,
Yeah.
And then like they take time asking him questions, trying to figure out, like that's where you end up with that confrontation with the big girl who identifies as 3 different things that you can't be at the same time. And then makes the argument that she's the one who said, like, well, if you sexualize someone else's genitalia, that's on you or whatever. But, and I see now as I'm looking at it, like Drew Hernandez, for example, makes his living with some kind of hidden camera technology, and he doesn't share it, and I can't really blame him. But he gets stuff that we would never get otherwise, because he gets the stuff that they do when they don't think they're being filmed. But
I've been asked why I don't do that.
Well, and at this point, I mean, I can understand it. The thing is that, what I've kind of grasped is that, maybe some of it is that they don't like that their press people were attacked, but it's also kind of that they want to have control of the narrative. They don't want anybody who's not on their team videotaping anyway, seems to be my understanding of the situation. And that's why Hernandez talks about their propaganda machine. Like, they know what they're doing, and that's, why I discussed, like, Drew kind of laid out the timeline of what they do, which is, well, they're going to go out there. They're going to start throwing stuff at the cops, and in a way that makes it difficult to figure out who did it. So then the cops declare their unlawful assembly. So then the cops start trying to clear people, and then their cameras start rolling so that they can get little clips of them getting hit, with beanbag rounds or getting hit over the head with a club, or, so that they. And I just watched on Twitter as this kind of happened in real time, where they tried to shift the public consciousness of what took place into police attacking peaceful protesters unprovoked.
Right.
And I'm like, unfortunately, I mean,
because they were anything but peaceful protesters.
Right. Well, yeah. No, I never had any illusions about that.
They were
but I think
up until the point where the protesters showed up and the police cut them off on Wilshire. That's when you saw it instantly change, because the barrage of items being thrown towards the protester group was, smoke grenades, which were clearly commercial grade smoke canisters that you would see coming from the military or police in different colors, rocks and bottles. And it was insane. I couldn't believe that they didn't even hold back. They just instantly were triggered.
Right. Well, and I think that one of the things that occurs to me through all of this is the same thing Dylan and I talked about. He talked about one of his frustrations is that these people are getting an overinflated idea of how dangerous they are. And, I live out in a conservative town, and if they ever tried that stuff here, it wouldn't last. I mean, aside from the fact that the local mayor would never tell the police not to do anything about it, the community would be out in the streets, and they'd be armed and they wouldn't be playing. Yeah. That's why I think they selectively are very careful about where they go, because they know they're not going to be able to get away with it in certain places, but they're trying to project power everywhere to give people the impression that they can come anywhere. And they've even made statements like, we are coming for your city and all that. And I'm like, yeah, that's not going to last. Yeah. And what concerns me is that it always feels when I'm watching this stuff that aside from the fact these people get delusions of grandeur, that they're somehow the equivalent of like soldiers storming the beaches of Normandy to fight fascism, or, or comparing themselves to the Viet Cong or whatever. And I'm like, you guys don't know what you're talking about at all. I was like, you have no concept of that. And you see it when they finally do meet real resistance, when they meet another group of people who's organized, who comes after them. And, and then that's when they go into victim mode, which is what, Precious was doing when they got their butts kicked, at one of the protests. But I think that, I guess when I look into the future, what I'm really concerned about is that back in 2008, when we were in Occupy and we were dealing with George Bush and we were dealing with Obama, when the Patriot Act come out, you look at the definition of domestic terrorism in the Patriot Act, and I went over this in my documentary called Hindsight is Always 2020, which was like Insurrection, Hindsight is Always 2020, which was comparing the riots of the summer to the one on the 6th, in January 6th. I was like, you guys are all domestic terrorists according to the Patriot Act. All of you. They every single part of the definition, I go over it line by line. So especially now that the cops are starting to take their own video, that's back then we were thinking that was for the purposes of, trying to make essentially kind of a file on everybody, who they think could be labeled a terrorist later so that they could go round these people up. And I think that whoever it is that's benefiting from this has finally had their fill of them is when that's going to happen. And I feel badly because it's clear to me that a lot of these people who end up in this stuff, frequently they're people who perhaps don't fit in anywhere else, so it's like a cult in that way. And it's unfortunate because I think that they're going to get a rude awakening, in the way that some of the really weird people at the January 6th riot got a rude awakening, when they got arrested and they're like, oh, this isn't me talking to my computer anymore. This is real world trouble. Right. I guess what I'm trying to wrap my head around is, when is that going to finally come to an end? I mean, Joe Biden comes out and says that, anarchists and, and all that should be prosecuted, but how do these district attorneys keep their jobs? And just letting these people get arrested, especially in Portland. In Portland, they're back out on the streets in hours. How does this continue? It makes me wish I could discuss this with those district attorneys and just call them out. Explain this to me. It's in Portland, they do stuff like throw Molotov cocktails at the police.
Right.
How does that person get back out on the street? And Villain talked about what happened to that guy. I guess they just got 11 months probation or something like that. I can't remember it wasn't correct. That's for sure. You throw a Molotov cocktail at somebody, you're trying to kill them. I guess just kind of further now we can discuss just what are your impressions now, having gotten involved in all this? What are, when you kind of look at this as somebody who was there, we discussed a little bit about what your instincts were about it, but and also if you had anything that you had heard in my discussion with Villain that you decided maybe you had some comments about, feel free to share them now.
I thought you and Villain covered the politics of it quite well. I think we've seen sort of a change to the group dynamics, which, Villain was pepper sprayed by somebody from the right. Other people with cameras were stopped and questioned and assaulted on the 17th. I think from what I'm seeing, it's getting worse. And I don't want to speculate as to why that is, but for instance, with me, when I had a group of Antifa, I was trying to get back to my vehicle, and directly in front of a group of officers behind WYSIWYG, I had a group of Antifa come up to me, and they're stopping me from filming. As it turns out, one of the people within that group was Drew Hernandez, who I didn't know at the time. I've heard of Drew. I did not know it was him, who at the moment I actually took as the biggest threat to me out there because of how he was dressed and what he was doing during this moment. So I had to react and do certain things, knowing that I've got this group of officers that are standing behind me, to only have them say, "You need to leave. You need to go down the street." And I'm like, are you serious? That's how you're going to handle this situation? And I see this group of Antifa go, "Yeah, there you go. Look, see, we can do whatever we want." And this group proceeded to follow me back down to the parallel street south of Wilshire. And the only thing I could do at that point was go, okay, well, I'm going to head towards the next group of police officers with this group of, 10, 12 people in tow, one of which was another press person who I didn't know who he was at the time. I went off of what he looked like and made the decision that based on he did nothing while they were stopping me, that he was Antifa press. They weren't bothered by him. They were bothered only by me. So I'm like, okay, so he's not an ally, and there's nobody in this group that's an ally. I'm literally out on the street by myself at this point with groups of Antifa roaming around because LAPD had cut them off and whatnot. So I headed back to towards where LAPD was out in the middle of the street where I had just left. To get down there to basically have an officer go, yeah, I can't help you. You have to go this way, which is further from my vehicle and by myself again, even though she was a public information officer, a PIO. She's like, oh, some other press people went that way. I go, oh, yeah, they're leftist press. They're not going to be any help to me either. So you're sending me away by myself with Antifa in tow, and you're not going to do anything to make sure that I'm safe. Okay, I get what's going on. I'm well aware. And so I was a little disturbed by that. And then by that point, Villain had been pepper sprayed, and I was hearing through my live stream and how I communicate that this had happened. So I start looking for Villain. I ended my live stream at that point. Just wanted to make sure I got to Villain, and then the two of us were able to get back to the vehicle safely without, any further attack. And that's how, well, it's not how my day ended. It's how his day ended. And I went back and I covered what turned out to be the kettle that they caught 41 of them in.
Right. Yeah, I saw pictures of that. I know they arrested a bunch of them. Did they? Now, what happened with that? Did any of them stay in jail, or are they all back out again?
No. According to LAPD, they were all processed through. All but one person. One person had what was considered weapons under the 55.07 municipal code about items permitted or not permitted at a protest. But everybody else got citations for failure to disperse and let go. So.
I remember during the Portland stuff, at one point, for whatever reason, the people in charge actually arrested everybody and then actually kept them for once. And as a result, the riots ended for 3 or 4 days because the instigators were all in jail, and that's why I say I really want to put the the screws to the thumbs of some of these DAs and figure out what the hell's going on, because they're basically setting up a situation where they know that they're just going to be able to do this whenever they want, and as long as they just keep doing that, they're just going to get more and more bold, know, and I think that it wouldn't even take much. If you just arrested all of these people, prosecuted them to the full extent of the law, it wouldn't take more than a couple times.
What are you going to prosecute them for? What law did they break?
Well, right. That was always one of the questions, I guess. But it's, when you see all the assaults and stuff, the problem is that then you got to identify which ones they are. That's why I said, as soon as they are in that scenario where, they're like, well, we're not taking reports right now. They're never going to catch the person who actually hit them. If the person's standing right there, they could. But it almost seems, I guess what I'm getting at, though, is that they have actually, kettled them and, went after them hardcore. I don't think it would take more than a couple of times for most of these people just to quit. I know, for example, I've heard, and I can't confirm this, but I heard a rumor that the Proud Boys are hurting pretty hard right now because a bunch of them have been indicted for the Capitol riot stuff, and they're not getting out. So it's kind of, sending a message of through the entire organization.
Scenario, it's worked, right?
Which is
if you were out there protesting, committing violent acts, breaking the law, and you knew that there was a chance that you'd go to jail for it, I guarantee you wouldn't be doing it.
A lot less people, that's for sure. A lot less people. And instead we've just kind of sent them a message that they're just free to do whatever they want within certain allotted periods of time. And that's it's tough to kind of piece that together, but it's at the end of the day, they don't want people to take arms up themselves, but if they're just standing there, that was something else I was going to say is when you discuss things with the left, one of the things I learned beyond a shadow of a doubt dealing with the Kyle Rittenhouse incident stuff was because I'm a leftist, all of my Facebook presence is in leftist groups, and I end up arguing with these people, and it's there is no outcome to them that is acceptable short of the mob being allowed to hurt anyone they want. And if you defend yourself, you're automatically an assaulter. If you kill one of them, you're automatically a murderer. It's murder if you kill them in self-defense. If the mob decides to attack you, the only acceptable outcome is that you get stomped out, like that guy in Portland, or you get, or you get shot, like Jay Danielson by Michael Reinl, or that's the element to it. And the funny thing is that they don't even frame it in the perspective of, like, say, a war, where our side is taking casualties. They take it as our side are the victims, and you are the murderers. It wasn't that there was a conflict, where there were mutual combatants. They always frame it that way, that anything that's done against them is murder. Anything they do against you is justified. And then you throw into that the fog of war of the fact that Antifa, by its design, is set up in such a way that because, they're all running around in masks and black bloc, and that's kind of the benefit of the black bloc strategy, is that anything that goes wrong, oh, well, it was really a right-winger in disguise. That's another thing I addressed in one of my documentaries, because, all the looting is supposedly all white supremacists. And I'm like, so I play a video of people who are very obviously not white supremacists because they're people of color engaged in looting and rioting. And I'm like, yeah, obviously they're all white supremacists.
Because they allow, yes.
Right. That's the part about it that they have so many deflection tactics to just kind of, try to put up a stealth device.
They're very good at it.
Yeah. Right. And they've created that scenario, and if you couple that with their cancel culture stuff and all that, it makes it very hostile. And when you say it's getting worse, looking at the stuff that's going on in New York right now, I would tend to agree. Especially in case, in some of these cases now, the cops are also kind of obviously getting fed up. The cops in LA, when they're finally got carte blanche to start swinging their billy clubs, they did it, and then in New York, they were not playing around. But New York's already been kind of on a different level of violence through all of this, even in early 2020. That's where the cops are getting hit in the head with bricks and stuff. But I just, it all kind of makes you wonder, what the end game is. When does this come to a real end? And that's why what I'm concerned about, and maybe some of my more conspiracy-leaning associates, would say that they think that, ironically, that all of this anti-fascist action, has the byproduct effect of bringing us to fascism. Because, ironically, what happens, ironically what happens is that, like I said to Velen, and I've said on different shows, I have friends who are moderate Republicans, very moderate, not MAGA hat-wearing Trumpers, they might have voted for him because he was the Republican. They don't have any devotion to any of the weird ideologies. They're not QAnon, and if these are people who, before 2020, if I ever described to them a situation where, say, federal, officers showed up and started rounding people up and putting them in vans and taking them away, they would be, horrified by the notion of that. About that total, fascist-looking, violation of their civil rights. Then you watch some videos of the crap that goes on the 3rd at the WYSIWYG, and, you fantasize about it. You're like, God, when are the cops going to show up and, put some billy clubs to some of these kids and put them in vans and just take them to camp somewhere? And that's why, I've said the same thing to Black Lives Matter. I was like, if you guys' objective is that you don't like that people are profiling you as violent criminals, I don't think that the strategy of going out and behaving exactly as racists say you behave is really in your best interest.
And that's what we saw happen on Thursday. So
go ahead.
This past Thursday, some of the same people that would have been out protesting WYSIWYG are out doing a vax medical freedom protest.
Oh, right,
and
the mask thing.
A group of these same people show up, including some of the press. The Shaw was one of the ones that was out there, and they just harass these people, and they attack them for what they're doing out there. And then we see the social media campaign and everything. It's getting worse, and they're getting more emboldened, and they're becoming the fascists that they claim everyone else is, and that is all there is to it.
Well, when you look at the ideological makeup, and this is stuff that I know because I'm left-leaning, I'm on a lot of these forums, and when you look at the ideological makeup, one of the things that we understood in Occupy was that, Antifa are primarily anarcho-communist, but they're not only anarcho-communist. Unfortunately, some of them are what would be called tankies, and tankies are essentially authoritarian communists. These are the kinds of people that make excuses for people like Mao or Stalin, and I've got clips of my discussions with them because people literally tell me I'm lying or making it up. I'm like, no, these people exist, and some of them are running with Antifa, and you can see it because you'll see the red and black diagonal flags. Those are anarcho-communist flags. But if you see the red flag with the hammer and sickles, well, now you're looking at authoritarian communists, and those kinds of people. The kind of communism they want is would line people up and execute them. It's a completely different attitude. And I think that those kinds of people also, especially when they start talking about being in favor of, say, censorship, being in favor of, robbing people of their civil rights, or determining that somebody's part of an enemy class and therefore they don't have the right to self-defense. This is all stuff that I've just been told. I can show you one of my older videos where I literally just went to one of my Facebook groups for Occupy to talk to some of these people because a lot of the same people are still there, and they just openly say, if we've determined that you're a fascist, you don't have a right to self-defense, I'm going to execute you. If we've determined you're fascist, you don't have a right to, to free speech. And the funny thing is that I just watched a series by a guy named Ryan Chapman on YouTube, and he does really great presentations breaking down things like critical race theory and stuff like that. And critical theory books openly just state that you shouldn't permit, free speech because, you should only permit speech essentially that comes down to, whatever is positive to the message that they want sent out, and that they think that it's important to control speech. And when I talk to old school leftists, like I had a guy by the name of Derek Jensen on my show, and he used to be a very prominent leftist anarchist, and he got excommunicated. And the reason is because he wrote a book where he said we should still have laws against rape and child molestation, and there were elements of the anarchist community that flipped out because he dared to say that. Well, anyway,
all or nothing.
Right. Well, he just pointed out, he actually kind of came around because of that to deciding that, some of these people, they could never handle a society with no police, no laws, and all that.
But
because
I say the same thing about free speech, right? Mm-hmm. I don't feel like you can have partial free speech. It's either you have free speech or you don't. That's my belief. No middle ground.
Well, and anybody anybody who's on the left should recognize that the only reason that the left even survived people like J. Edgar Hoover was free speech. Free speech is the only reason there is a leftist movement in the United States. But now that they think that they're winning, they just want to turn it off. To me...
Well, the history is not a very strong suit for some folks.
Well, right, and that's why they want to rewrite it. Every Stalinist I talk to claims that every negative thing ever said about Stalin was either propaganda or that they have some weird way of justifying it. So, the history is not to their benefit, and, they, when it comes to the critical race theory stuff, they're just kind of outright lying and saying that it's just expanded black history, because they're trying to make anybody who doesn't like it look bad, or they're trying to say that people are trying to ban critical race theory or just trying to ban black history. And I'm like, look, I emerged from my education in the 80s and 90s despising racism, despising slavery. I knew about Jim Crow. I knew that black people couldn't vote. I mean, all the things were there. I was like, that's not what you guys are teaching. You guys have something else going on. And that's what actually is causing problems, where I'm in this absurd situation where I'm the one leftist in the town full of conservatives, and they're asking me to come to school board meetings to help them talk because,
Right.
I can, I'm an activist, so it puts me in a strange bedfellow situation in my own school district. But the point is that all of this seems to be part of like a greater plan, and whoever it is that benefits from it, I'm not sure. I'm sure that there are multiple actors in the situation who think that they're going to manipulate it to their benefit. And it just worries me. I think that I think that's one of the problems. A lot of people are looking at this and thinking, well, it'll blow over eventually. And I'm starting to wonder, will it?
My gut tells me it's not just going to blow over.
Yeah, I'm kind of leaning in the same direction. It seems like something terrible is going to have to happen, before that happens.
I feel stubbornness is going to win out.
You think what part is going to win out?
I think stubbornness is going to beat everybody.
Right.
And I think both sides are very stubborn to the extreme ends of that. And that's going to get them to the point where nobody's going to back down, and it's going to just get more violent before it ends.
Well, some of it is
my fear.
Well, no, I think that's correct, and I think that part of it is that we as Americans have been kind of spoiled, and that there hasn't really been a major armed conflict on our soil in so long, that the only people who know what one looks like are our veterans, and
right.
I do think that this group of kids that are, beating people up outside the WYSIWYG are going to be in for a rude awakening, when things finally do go down, because it's not going to look anything like a gang of people following one guy with a camera and punching him in the face. It's going to look very different. And there are people on the right who are a hell of a lot more prepared than they are for that possibility.
Yeah.
Is there a bird in your house?
No, there is not.
Okay.
But there are birds around the house, and they're very loud, especially at night. They all seem to come out. It
doesn't bother me. I was just like, that's interesting. Anyway.
Yeah.
We've had a really great conversation. I wanted to give you the opportunity, first of all, can you tell people a little bit about what you do so that we can, any of my listeners and viewers can come check you out?
What do I do? That's a really good question. I've honestly been trying to figure that out for months now. And I started out just going out on the street, showing what's going on. And it's sort of grown. It's built a little bit of a community. I've made a lot of interesting friends and connections because of it. It doesn't really have a focus, but the goal is just to show what's happening on the street. What you see is what you get, which was an awful name to come up with. But honestly, it was really just something to not use my name and to be able to get a live feed out for people to see what was going on. And but at the same time, it's also turned out to be very truthful because I'm not a journalist. I don't claim to be a journalist. I've been told what I do is sort of true journalism because most of the time, I allow the viewer to just see what's happening and make a decision for themselves.
Right. Well, that used to be what journalism was.
Sort of, yeah. I'm big on this idea of decentralized media, but I've also sort of just been so overwhelmed by just being out there with a camera and trying to provide such a good view of things that I try not to do fluff. I try not to. I want to give the audience something to see. So I tend to only go live when there's actually something going on. So usually people know that if I'm live, something important's happening, and I try to keep it at that. I rarely ever do any studio or, home broadcasts. I've done a couple just because it's been issues that have been important to me and things that I wanted to talk about. But I'm sort of a fair weather live streamer. If there's nothing going on, I'm not just making content to get people to watch. So,
well, and that's totally fair, but that comes back to like what you said earlier. Like I said, when journalists used to do that, journalism used to be people competing with each other on who was going to get the most truthful, accurate story out there. That used to be what it was. And now it's, if you work for MSNBC, you need to find the most left-leaning, translated into the best Democratic Party line story that you can. And then if you work for Fox News, then it's the Republican-leaning part of the story that you can. There is, and they just kind of gave up on even trying to like actually share events anymore. Everything is slanted, and they just don't even pretend anymore. They're both in the spin route, and it's to the point where, they're losing credibility, which gives me hope. I might listen to clips every now and then, but I certainly don't get my day-to-day events from people like that.
Right.
So
I have
anyway,
a hard time not letting my feelings show, which is
right.
one of my weaknesses, because I feel like I've got a pretty good heart, and I see injustice, and I want to show it. I like talking to people. I will talk to anybody on the street. I'm not necessarily it's hard for me to start a conversation, but I've had some of these moments in the past that have allowed me to talk to some people that I probably wouldn't have on a normal basis, just because starting those conversations is sometimes awkward for me. But I've some of the most memorable ones have been unique experiences with people that I've found very interesting, and I used to do more of that. I've done less of it because it seemed more dangerous out at some of these events. But we're going to see where it goes, and just try to bring people, hopefully, the truth.
That's kind of where I was at
decide
too.
For themselves. Yeah.
Right. And, I tell people, like, if I am going to give my opinion on something, I'm kind of clear that, this is my opinion. But in general, I'm trying to be careful to not form opinions that are not informed. It's just like, I try to, like, it was like with the thing with Kyle Rittenhouse. Initially, when I was like, man, I was wondering when some crazy shooter was going to show up to one of these things. And, so that's what I thought I was getting into when I started that project. And then I spent 2 weeks of reviewing footage, 8 to 12-hour days. I literally hurt myself from sitting in my chair too long. And I was like, no, that's not what's going on. This kid isn't some just crazy shooter. I don't necessarily think that what he did was wise, but that's the truth of it. And then that was, I just saw people tearing each other up, just straight up lying, to each other about it. And that kind of like set the stage for me to look at things differently, because from then on out, everybody's got their own lives on everything. And society can't function if we can't have any kind of a grasp on what's really going on. How can we legislate if we don't know what's really going on? How can we, function, and interact together? That's what is leading to people saying things like, maybe we need certain states to secede from the union or whatever. And I'm like, oh my goodness, we've gotten that divided. And then, to top all this off, you look at the social media algorithms. I don't know if you've watched the documentaries like The Creepy Line, that explain, like, I guess they had whistleblowers from Facebook and Twitter and all that come forward and say, look, this algorithm is designed to only show people things that will keep them on their phones and computers. And the two things that keep people on their phones and computers the most are things that make you angry and something that echoes everything you already thought. So that creates the circumstances of terrible division, and, in one African country where the Facebook is the internet basically for them, it led to a genocide, because they were all just being pitted against each other over and over and over again, because the feed shows you whatever, like the computer monitors and sees what you keep, and they try to say.
You sort of see that happening here in the States to a certain extent, not to an absolute degree, but, it's definitely pitted people against each other.
Right. Well, they didn't have any alternatives. They're only looking at Facebook, and it doesn't help that, obviously their culture is a bit more warlike. But the point is that these things are going on and people are not cognizant of it. And it's, it's definitely dangerous to the future of our society, because if we can't get a grip on this, I'm concerned that if we can't reason ever, it's going to cause all kinds of problems, because now they want everything to be about feelings. One of the things that, that occurs to me when they say things like abolish the police, let's have community justice. Well, the first thing that comes to my mind when somebody says that is, a horrible picture of a black man hanging from a tree because a mob decided that he looked at a white woman the wrong way. I'm like, community justice doesn't work, guys.
Right.
It's like, you may think it does, but it doesn't. Would you want...
Well, I think that's sort of what Antifa thinks right now with what they're doing, is it's community justice. With the free speech argument, you have the right to say what you want, but when the community doesn't like what you say, we're going to come out here and we're going to stop it.
Right. No, I agree. But they think that they know what's going on, and in many cases they just don't. They believe they do, but the truth of it is that they really only have their own spin, and I can't trust a mob with major decisions, but anyway, This has been a great talk. I hope that you and I can keep in touch, and, if you cover anything else interesting in the future, that you'd like to share with me, by all means. My channel's not monetized. I don't do anything for money at this point. I am, even when I'm done with my physical therapy, it's possible that walking is never going to be really the same ever again. So it is possible that I may not be able to do the job that I used to do. If that happens, then I may become professional again, but I don't foresee that happening in the near future regardless. But in the meantime, I'm just motivated by getting the truth out there. So I want to thank you for coming on and sharing with me, what you learned about, the third, because I think that's kind of a perfect storm for seeing what happens if you just let Antifa do whatever they want.
I agree.
So anyway, obviously I can put the link in the description, but you have a YouTube channel. Is that basically your primary?
I do. YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch are the three primaries, and I usually always stream to Twitter as well as the four platforms that I go out on. They're all WYSIWYG TV on all the platforms. So whatever people like to watch on.
Okay. Well, again, it's been great talking to you. If you don't mind, generally after I have a guest on, I usually talk to them very briefly off the air. So if you could just call me when we're done here.
You got it.
And I'm going to say thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Again, this is the first time you've tuned in. Please check out my archives. I'm going to be providing links to his various social media contacts that you can follow his work as well. And again, what I ask people, because people ask me all the time if they can donate, and as I said, I'm not really making that a priority right now. What you could really do for me and for other people who do work like me is share these podcasts and these videos, because the algorithm doesn't like people that say the truth, the unfiltered truth. The algorithm likes people that, are saying what they want to hear. And unfortunately, Google has already been shown to have a very clear agenda on what they want seen and heard. So share the heck out of this stuff, because that's one way that you can just directly, combat that issue. If you like what you're hearing here, then please do that. And to any of you who might be deciding, okay, well, let me go check out his channel now, I'm going to warn you ahead of time. I guarantee you, because I'm this weird guy who has fans who are left and fans that are right, you're not going to like everything I say. But I would challenge you that it's better for your brain to find people that you don't agree with about everything all the time. Because one of the biggest problems we have in our society right now is everybody's trapped in their echo chambers, and they're never challenged on any of their beliefs. They're just reinforced on their beliefs all the time, So I do this myself. Like, for example, I listen to Ben Shapiro sometimes. He and I probably have nothing in common when we're discussing economics, but there are some things that he says that I agree with. Same thing with, say, Jordan Peterson or Drew Hernandez or, You know, like all these people, like if you can't sit through a conversation with somebody who doesn't just echo everything that's going on in your head, are you really critically thinking? If your thoughts are essentially just faith, you know, and the only way for you to protect them is to never expose yourself to anything outside of your church, I put in quotes, you know, then do you really have faith? You know, I mean, do you really have, like, you know, honest, real beliefs that are yours, that you've tested? You know, and I think that's one of the major things that unfortunately is dying in this environment that I think is critical to our society, is our ability to think and analyze, you know, and come to educated opinions about things, you know, before we run off at the mouth about them, or before we say, go into the streets and beat people up over them. So, thanks again, everybody, for tuning in to V Radio.